sitting thinking, oh, I'm sure I'm
no.
supposed to be in a webinar this afternoon, but that doesn't seem to be happening.
I think it might be next month. So.
Oh dear, that's a terrible sign of old age, isn't it?
It is actually.
Brain cells are dropping off.
Live on Facebook now, Claire, tells us about your age.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to the Dunes webinar. I think we're going to learn loads about that. It sounds, it looks like it's going to be really interesting.
It's a good pictures in there and maps. I always like presentations and talks with maps in.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's me. And if it's historic maps, which I don't think there is in this talk, it's even better.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I would love an old map.
It also connects up a bit with a project that seems to be quite a new project, Species on the Edge. Have you seen about that? It's covering the whole of the Solway. So, well, I think it's actually a national initiative being run by various organisations. And so like for our tidelines issue, I'll have an article coming in on that. So it's kind of connecting with the dunes, because Species on the Edge are including things like natterjack toads and
so is it recording species that are under threat, or species on the edge sounds like something around species that maybe...
it's more than just recording, but working with a variety of species. So no doubt you'll hear about it soon enough. It was just really because it's only just started, really. So but I would kind of got in there because I wanted an article for tidelines. So,
yeah. That sounds really good.
Fits in really well.
That sounds good. It'd be nice to get involved with that, because we've had a few projects around sort of recording, and obviously we're doing quite a lot on nature recovery and conservation. So it'll be good to be able to kind of do something, sort of develop that a little bit more, really, especially all the nature recovery stuff going on at the moment. So sounds really good. So we're gonna hang fire, aren't we? Just to let anyone know, we've got a few more people joined, I think, aren't we? We're gonna hang fire for another. Well, it's 25 past now, isn't it? So we'll start around 25 to.
Give people a chance to sign in and get themselves sorted, and sat down with a cup of tea or a Thursday evening glass of wine.
It is nearly the weekend.
It is the start of the weekend for some people.
Eve of the weekend, to Christmas Eve now. So that's something to think about. So so I'm afraid anybody who's joined now and is listening, you're going to have to put up with Claire and I chitter-chatting for a few minutes now, and we'll try to think of something scintillating
about the
to talk to, but it probably won't be. How are things in Scotland? How are you finding the lockdown in Scotland, Dumfries and Galloway? What's
I think that we had very high numbers in Dumfries and Galloway kind of at the beginning of the year, but they seem to be dropping down quite rapidly now, whereas for a while they stayed quite high. So it's definitely, obviously had a positive effect here. But I mean, I live out in the sticks, I have to say, so it's not nearly as bad for me as it is for lots and lots of other people. Although it'd be really nice to be able to get together with people and to meet up face to face, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think I'm quite mixed with the whole. I mean, we're obviously talking a lot on the computer screen a lot of the time. I've had a few meetings today, Zoom meetings. So, it's good in some ways, because I think we can sort of collaborate a little bit more with people more regularly that we probably wouldn't have done normally if we had to meet physically. But it doesn't really. It's not the same as seeing people face to face, I think, really.
No, I know, it's difficult. So Anne's joined us, and she's saying that she's not seeing any participants or even a list. Does everybody get to see the list of who else is participating in the Zoom?
Yeah, you should do. I mean, I'm looking. I'm sure Anne knows how to do this. It should be. Sorry, Anna's saying something.
No, for privacy, you don't see other attendees.
Okay. Right. Okay. Oh, that's fine. Thank you, Anna.
Sense.
We have a voice.
Sorry, Anne. You won't be able to see who else is joining.
I can tell you that we've got 39 people on the call so far. So I don't know if that particularly helps, Anne, or not really, but.
And it was fully booked, wasn't it? Which is, we were having to turn people away. But anybody that hasn't been able to kind of book on to the Zoom version will be able to watch it either live on Facebook or catch it afterwards on either the Solway Coast AONB or the SFP YouTube channels. So there are lots of opportunities to catch up.
Yeah. So hopefully that. Thank you, Anna. We do have a little voice in the background. Disembodied voice is actually Anna, who's our technical person.
She'll keep us straight if we get stuck.
See ya. And
I have to say that we're not awfully good at the techie stuff, but we're getting better, because the more meetings that we have online and on Zoom, then you do start to kind of work out how everything goes, which is quite good.
Yeah, and I think can be slightly confusing concept because people use different platforms, don't they, for different things. Yeah. So, but I think the ones but other people seem to use the most are Zoom or Microsoft Teams. So both of them seem to be sort of okay, for.
So it's good that we've got so many people joining tonight, actually, because I realise there is a clash with a couple of other webinars that are happening in Dumfries and Galloway, certainly, but I won't tell you what they are in case you decide to jump ship and go watch those instead. But they start a bit later. Yeah, they start a bit. Don't tell them. They start at 7:30. So in fact, you've got time to get dynamic dunes in, and also go to either a damp map webinar or the Runes Stones webinar. So that's an archaeology one.
Really interesting.
Which would be interesting as well. Yeah, so I might try and catch the end of that one.
Oh God, that's a lot of time on Zoom.
Yeah, I know, it might just be too much. But so that's past now, but we haven't got everybody joining us just yet. Everybody's just kind of coming in. It takes a little while to get people through the portal in the ether. So we'll give a few more minutes. So we have got.
Sorry, Claire, we're jumping over each other.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was just going to say we have got people going to do both webinars tonight, so that's a job.
Yeah, no, we've already had somebody saying that they're going to do both webinars tonight, so we have some toughies with us tonight. So it's obviously me that's just announced the fact that I haven't got enough energy to do 2 webinars, but here we are. Oh dear. What's the weather like over? It's terrible talking small talk about the weather. I am obsessed with the weather.
It's been really nice actually today.
It's been nice today actually. Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't know what the forecast is for tomorrow, but
okay, it's good.
Is it? Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
I do have to pop out to do something outside, so yeah, that'd be useful.
We had 2 days of really horrid weather yesterday and the day before, but weather system is quite interesting because we tend to have similar weather to you, Claire. We don't have a lot. It can be really different. Other parts.
We have a strange situation where even if you look up the weather forecast for where I live, which is like literally across the Solway from you, quite often if it says it's going to rain, it doesn't happen here. It's a bit like we have our own little microclimate that's often, sometimes we do get it really bad, but quite often we just miss. We're just on the edge of a front or something. I don't know whether it's Criffle, but the Criffle holds the weather in a certain way. I'm not sure.
You think maybe that we need a session on the weather?
That's a good idea. Solway weather.
The Criffle, Colin says, on our speakers, says the Criffle changes the weather, which is
I'm not surprised at that, and I'm not sure that the kind of weather forecasting can really take the kind of really small areas into account like that. So
it's relief rain, I guess, isn't it? Because they're really showing my knowledge here, but when the clouds hit Criffle, then it starts to rain, doesn't it?
It all drops out.
Geography A level. I shouldn't try this.
We'll just give it a couple more minutes. We've our numbers are still.
What are we on now? 57 at the moment, so that's good. Just people start to message already. We'll talk about the sort of ins and outs of Zoom in a little bit. I'm sure most of you are familiar, like we all are by now, how to work Zoom and use all the little different bits and pieces. But we'll go through those in a minute anyway, just for anyone.
Give people that chance to finish off their tea and sit down.
Yeah.
So
that's Colin again, isn't it? Often find new abbey in pools of water, but Mainsville dry and sunny.
I know, it's amazing actually how the weather can be different from just like literally half a mile down the road.
Yeah.
Strange that,
isn't it? Oh, we've got hello from Marlborough. Hello from Marlborough. It's good. It's nice. People are chatting already. It's great.
So have we got anybody from far-flung places on the chat tonight?
Come on.
Where's the furthest away that people are joining us from? That'd be quite.
I think Marlborough is pretty exotic, to be honest. We'll get a flurry as well. We'll find out.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see. This is a nice thing.
Oh, there we go.
Penrith. I am
wow.
on holiday to Maine a few years ago and I cried when I had to leave because I loved it so much.
Massachusetts. Wow.
Oh wow. Oh my goodness. It's like, oh right, brilliant.
So that's amazing. Yeah.
Maybe we can have some American Dune stories and snippets as well.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Quite nice. Sand dunes.
So how they cope with their dune erosion in
Sheffield. Brilliant.
Wow. I don't think there's a lot of dunes in Sheffield, I believe, but you know.
I know. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But it's really nice that people are able to kind of join from all over the place, isn't it? You know, learn about something that.
Yeah, and the good thing about Britain is that it's not that far to the coast, is it really? So whereas if you're in the middle of America, USA.
Yeah, and there's a whole long way to Inverness.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Oh wow. And Northern Ireland. My goodness, we've got a real exotic group tonight, haven't we? This is great.
Yeah.
Wow.
And hi, Donald from Treforald, just along the road from me. That's not too far.
Do you know what? I was going to say where's Treforald, but I didn't want to look like I didn't know where it was.
It's just outside Dumfries, actually. It's not that far. So.
Oh, brilliant. Kirkbride, another Marlborough. That's great.
Yeah.
You've got such great place names.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Over in Dumfries and Galloway, so it's good.
Yeah, Crossmichael. That's just up from Castle Douglas.
All right, that's good.
So that's 25 to now. So I think we'll probably kick off and get going. So we don't want to hold people up, especially when we know they've got another webinar to go to. So we just want to kind of welcome you all to the Dynamic Dunes on the Solway webinar. I'm Claire McFarlane and I'm the Partnership Manager for Solway Firth Partnership. And this is my colleague from across the Solway, Naomi Kay, who's the manager of the Solway Coast Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. So we started doing these joint webinars kind of late last year because we weren't able to get together to hold our conference that we would normally do. And we normally use the conference as an opportunity to celebrate the Solway Firth and the culture and heritage of the marine and coastal environment. And because the webinars have been really well received, we thought we'd carry on and do a few more with topics that we thought people would be interested in. So we've only run a few of these webinars before, so please bear with us in case we have any kind of glitches with the technology, but hopefully we won't have tonight. I think we're starting to get to grips with it. And if you want to know anything else about our organisations, then please visit our website, so the Solway Coast AONB or Solway Firth Partnership. Just Google it and you'll be able to find them. And you can see some of the projects that we've been working on and some of the resources that we have. And also there's lots of great images from around the Solway. So if you're interested, have a look on those. And also on our YouTube channels as well, actually, we've got some good kind of films and videos. So I'll hand you over to Naomi and she'll explain a little bit more about the evening.
Yeah, so some of you know this already because you've been to some of these sessions before, but we're obviously running this on Zoom, but we're running it on a webinar function. So this means as participants, your camera and video are automatically switched off. So if you wonder why you can't see each other, it's because it's a webinar function. You can still participate. I think we've realised that now because people are starting to chat already, which is great. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat option where you can post things just like comments, observations to everyone on the webinar. So please feel free to use this. Just click on it to bring up the chat window and you can see what people have written. The only tip that I'll give if you're posting a comment, just make sure that you select the option at the bottom, all panelists and attendees, instead of all panelists. Because your comments won't be seen by everyone, so sometimes you have to switch that on just so everyone can see your comments, because we don't want that just to go to panelists. You'll also see next to it that we have a questions and answers Q&A option, which is a little button at the bottom of your screen as well. Now, if you've got questions for the speakers, please post them in the Q&A button rather than the chat button. So use the chat as chat, the questions and answers as the questions. Because we're going to choose some of them to be answered at the end of the talk. So we do encourage your questions. We can't answer all of them, I don't think, but do please feel free to post them. Final note is that this session is currently being live streamed on Facebook. This is how good we are at technology. So it is being recorded as well. and it will be available on both the Solway Firth partnership and the A1B YouTube channel, so you can watch it afterwards. So if you have to dart off to another webinar, which I hope you don't do, you can catch up with it afterwards, so please do that. Our other talks are also on YouTube as well, so you can catch up with some of the things that we've done before Christmas. So it's now time to introduce the 3 speakers. So we've got extra bonus this time because we normally have 2 speakers, but this time we've got 3. So we're going to be particularly strict with them with time. We've told them that already. So we have, first we have Eve Mulholland, who's the engagement officer for the Dynamic Dunescapes in Cumbria, and she works for Cumbria Wildlife Trust. So Eve specialises in linking coastal communities with a natural environment. She's particularly interested in specialist dune species and sustainable dune management, but also ensuring local people are at the heart of any project. So she's going to talk first. We'll then have Colin Bartholomew, who has already been on the chat, so he's multitasking well. He's the site manager at RSPB Scotland Mersehead Nature Reserve. So welcome, Colin. And then finally, we'll have Chris Spencer, who is the deputy manager of the Solway Coast Area of Outstanding Attributed Teams, who works in my team. Chris, some of you will know, he's been leading on a nature recovery project in Marlborough Banks Nature Reserve and working to improve the health of the dune habitat. And he loves the diversity of the Solway Coast landscape and heritage, which I think we probably all do, actually. So we're going to start with Eve first. So we'll switch our videos off and we'll let Eve switch her sound and camera back on and hand over to here she is. What an excellent cue. Welcome, Eve.
Hi there, hopefully you can all hear and see me okay. So thanks very much for having me this evening. I'm Eve Mulholland, I'm the Engagement Officer for Dynamic Dunescapes in Cumbria and working for Cumbria Wildlife Trust. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the project tonight and why sand dunes are so important. So Dynamic Dunescapes is part of a national project restoring some of the most important sand dune systems, and there's many partners involved here, and it's funded by National Lottery Heritage Fund and EU Life Programme. So the project's working across many areas. We're working across 34 sites in total, but here up in Cumbria, we're working across 11 of those sites. And the Cumbria team, led by Cumbria Wildlife Trust with my own role and Natural England, who are leading on the conservation works for the project, working from the Solway coast, so up at Marlborough Banks and Green Point, working very closely with Solway Coast AONB, all the way down Copeland, Barrowborough on the island. We're also working at Fleetwood too. And the project, it's all about restoring sand dunes, but we're wanting to get people and the communities involved in the project too. So why sand dunes then? Well, sand dunes are actually the habitat most at risk in Europe for biodiversity loss. They're very much at threat from habitat loss and habitat fragmentation. And to put this in perspective, since the 1900s, Wales has lost 60% of this habitat, and only 20,000 hectares remain across England and Wales. So it's very much declining habitat. But sand dunes are home to many different specialised wildlife, plants and animals that rely on these sand dune systems. So they've been identified as a priority habitat. And this is because they are at risk, because sand dunes become overgrown with vegetation and have almost stabilised. So the way in which we manage sand dunes now has changed slightly. So the project's all about implementing these new conservation techniques to support the biodiversity that lives there. So sand dunes, our coastlines, they're very changeable in that environments, and some areas are at the forefront of the weather systems facing erosion. In other areas, shingle spits are starting to form, and the circulation of sands, meaning new sand dunes, are starting to grow and develop. And there's many different habitat types within a sand dune system, and in a healthy sand dune, there's a range of habitat types, meaning there's a wide range of biodiversity. So dune begins life as embryo dune, so sand accumulates, pioneer species start to grow. These are very sandy, open, changing habitat types. And within dune systems, you also have fixed dunes as well, so more nutrients are input into the ground, so lots of mosses, lichens, fungi, even dune heath and dune grassland containing a wide variety of wildflowers can grow too. And these fixed dunes tend to have less areas of bare sand within them. And you also have dune slacks within their sand dune systems as well. And these are depressions within the dune systems caused by erosion, meaning they're closer to the water table. So these often hold pools which are ephemeral, and these are important for invertebrates, very specialist orchids and plant species, but also the home of the natterjack toad too, where they use these pools for breeding. And you also have later successional stages where you might find some areas of scrubland or woodland too. But the thing that the dunes face is dune stabilisation, and it's these latter successional stages which have almost exploded and kind of outcompeted these earlier dune successional stages. So these maps here, this shows Sandscale Horse, so down the coast from the Silloth. This nature reserve, these red patches show the areas of bare sand. So as you can see in 1946, about 40% of this dune system was covered in bare sand, compared to today when less than 2% of this dune system is covered in bare sand. So there's a stark difference there, and this we're seeing this all around the country. This is not just at this site, this is a trend that we're seeing in quite a lot of places. And there's a variety of reasons that are leading to this kind of loss of sandy open habitat and this overgrowth of vegetation. So dunes have been historically used for grazing cattle, grazing sheep, but also rabbit warrens too. And rabbits are kind of the main graziers of dunes. They'll burrow, opening up bare patches of sand, and alongside the cattle and sheep as well, they'll graze to keep that scrub at bay. But recently we've seen loss of rabbit populations due to fluctuations by myxomatosis, which is a man-made introduced disease and to control rabbit populations. We've also seen increase in atmospheric nitrogen deposition and putting nutrients into the ground, and climate change too. So reduction in wind speeds, increased rain, accelerating that vegetation growth, as well as changes in how the land has been used and how we've historically managed dunes as well. This is a map just showing kind of the as you can see, Sandscale Horse was once a rabbit warren as well in the 1850s. And here we've got Esmeal's dunes. So this is an image taken in 1970, which shows just how open and sandy this habitat once was. And another example of Esmeal's dunes here, as you can see, there's lots of open sand, lots of shingle, a very kind of changing and dynamic system. So it's very different to now what we see today because of this variety of different factors. So why is this an issue then? Well, many of the important species that live on our dunes rely on this open space habitat to thrive, one of which is the natterjack toad, which I'm going to leave to Colin and Chris to talk about a bit more later on. But another is the northern dune tiger beetle, and this is one of my favourite species on the dunes. It's possibly one of the fastest beetles in the world. And it's only found on Drigg dunes in the centre of Cumbrian coastline and on Sefton coast too, and it's highly adapted to live on these mobile dune habitats because it burrows in the sand to lay its eggs. It needs certain temperatures to be able to regulate its body, and the larvae will develop within these burrows, and they'll overwinter there too. So it's highly adapted for this particular environment, and it'll also hide amongst the marram grass as well if it's too warm to keep itself cool. And it will only live in these embryo habitats. We've also got a variety of different plant species as well. And the dune helleborine, this is a nationally scarce species, and the only known record of it is at Sandscale Horse. We've got the yellow bird's nest, this is a red listed species. This plant actually contains no chlorophyll, so it has like a mycorrhizal relationship, so it gains its nutrients from this relationship there. And finally, on the right hand side, that nice pretty yellow flower. This is the Isle of Man cabbage, and this is recorded up on the Solway coastal area up there, but it's now only found in about 22 localities. And the reason for this decline is still yet unknown, but it could be related to the habitat fragmentation of dunes, for instance. And you can find this species growing in kind of the open mobile dune environment. And going on to the Silloth coastline, we're very lucky to have an area of dune heath, and this is a habitat becoming ever rare in Cumbria. And this dune heath in particular is home to a wide variety of invertebrates, and in particular bees. And one of those bee species is the heather mining bee, and what it will do, it will collect pollen specifically from the bell heather. And its flight season kind of coincides with when these flowers emerge. And it's a solitary bee, so it also burrows in the ground around the dune heathland too. We also find the heath bumblebee, and this is also associated with dune heath, but dune heath on the upland areas as well. But it's not only restricted to dune heath, so it's a little bit more widespread. The Mowbray Banks and Groom Point and the whole Silloth coastline is home to a wide variety of bird species too. So you've got your ground nesting birds such as your skylarks, your stonechats and linnets, which you can find around the dune system. You might be lucky enough to spot your migratory birds as well, such as your Arctic terns or little terns. And the shingle banks around the dune systems are also a habitat for nesting birds as well, such as the ring plover, which has been recorded nesting in the area. So there's a whole host of species that rely on this dune habitat type. So dynamic dunescapes, it's all about implementing and helping the dune systems to get them dynamic and moving again, and to help create a wide variety of different habitat types for all of these species to thrive. So there's a range of works that will be happening as part of the project, and Chris and Colin, I'm sure, are going to be telling us more about what's happening on the dunes. But this might range from opening up areas of bare sand on dune grassland to restoring and creating new pools and dune slats, to the introduction of grazing to help keep that dune grassland habitat healthy. And the project overall is aiming to restore 7,000 hectares of sand dune systems across the 34 sites in total, ensuring 35% of these are in favourable condition, and at least half of the important rare and protected species are supported through piloting and sharing best practice. But as I mentioned earlier, it's not only about the dune restoration itself, it's about getting people involved. So one of the things that we're doing up at Mowbray Banks, working with Chris at Solway Coastway AONB, is introducing a citizen science scheme. And this is a part of a long-term national pioneering scheme to monitor and understand our sand dunes, to understand exactly how these conservation works are and the effects that they are having on the sand dune systems there, to in future ensure that the future sustainability and the management of our dunes. So we will be looking for volunteers to get involved and to train them up to get involved in the project there. And you can find out more on the Cumbria Wildlife Trust website. And with the exciting news of the potential easing restrictions, well, we're hoping to be running events on the dunes. And this is about kind of informing on the wide variety of wildlife, getting people outside and excited about the wonderful environment that they've got on their doorstep. So you can find out more on our Dynamic Dunescapes website and on the Cumbria Wildlife Trust website too. So I'm going to unshare my screen now and hand over to Colin, who's going to take us on to the other side of the Firth, I believe, to explore his sand dune area there.
Hello, everyone. So I've just got to... Hello, can everyone hear me? Yeah, welcome. Thank you for inviting me along to this tonight. My name's Colin Bartholomew. I'm the site manager for RSPB Mersehead Nature Reserve. And just going to briefly talk to you about what we want to do with the dune systems at Mersehead. It's a relatively untouched habitat for us for the last 20 odd years since we've owned the site. And there's many reasons for that, as I'll go into as we go through the talk. So just find my... Okay, so the reserve, Mersehead itself is approximately 1,200 hectares in area. Over 700 hectares of that actually reaches out into the Solworth itself, which we lease off the Crown Estate. The physical area of land is more about 400 hectares that we manage. Now, it comprises of, like I said, intertidal going out into the Meuse, over 20 hectares of dunes and dune grasslands, and 400 odd hectares of wetlands, dry grassland, and a very small area of woodlands. And within that wetlands is a very small reed bed as well. The reserve lies in the upper Solway Flats and Marshes SSSI SPA. It's a part Ramsar site and is part of the East Territory National Scenic Area. So it's pretty well sort of cited on an important site. I'm going to put you onto another slide here now. This is quite important, and it'll explain why we haven't really dealt with the dune system for quite a while. In 2017, we had the opportunity to acquire new land. So the pink areas are Mersehead and West Preston, and the purple areas in particular, Preston Mears, joins our reserve up. So we joined the jigsaw up to allow us to manage the whole site a lot better. And it's given us an opportunity to start really thinking what we want to do in the dunes. So I will continue. And just to give you some concept really of the area. So you're looking, this aerial photograph is looking, if you look to the bottom of the picture, that's to the west of the site, and then going up to the top of the picture to the little spit, which is Southerness, is the absolute point of the reserve, and it captures Mersehead, Preston Mears, and West Preston, and you can see along the edge of the picture there the dune systems that we want to manage. And to give you more concept, this is looking down on part of the reserve. Now, one of the things about the reserve is we are managing for important species of geese, which is the Svalbard barnacle geese, come down every year and winter in the Solway, on the Solway coast. They like to winter very close to the coastline, but we manage the reserve primarily to provide habitat for these geese as they winter here before they return back to the Arctic Circle in the spring. There's a population of some 43,000 of these birds. It's been an amazing conservation recovery. Just after the Second World War, there was only 450 of these birds left in the world, and now there's over 43,000. Mersehead's very lucky to, and West Preston's very lucky to accommodate roughly about a third of that population as they spread all the way along the coastline. Part of that comes with actually we manage for geese, and you can see by this aerial picture there is a squeeze. You can see where we do crop rotations to keep the soils nice and fertile, but we're pushing way up to the sand dunes, as you can see by this photograph. I also want to talk a little bit about the history. Now, the history of the site, we're going to go back several thousand years, if not more. This is looking west towards Sandy Hills, and you can see in the background there, there's little farmsteads. And even though Mersehead is quite flat, you will start to realize that over millennia, we realized that actually the reserve has got various pockets of flattened, manicured fossilized sand dunes, and they go further beyond this. And the big yellow bit at the far end is where all the farmsteads, everything built. So these farmsteads were built in the 1700s, so they knew what they were doing. They never flood. And then the far point is where the dune systems are reaching the coast. We know from old marine maps as well that the dune systems and the land actually went further out into the Solway at this point of the reserve. So again, looking west towards Sandy Hills, this is the dune systems here are very vulnerable to erosion and have been for many, many years. Various parts of this sandy beach that you're looking at one point was farmland. It's slowly been eroded and it suffers from dreadful sort of coastal events, as you can see. And the next picture I'm going to show you is the same sand dune, but looking east this time. So this was a result of tidal storm surges in 2013/14 winter, and it completely obliterated the dunes. I'm pleased to say, you know, after even going back 7 years ago, that those dune systems are now built up again. So there's an awful lot of accretion and erosion going on. So it's quite a dynamic part of the reserve, which is quite important. We'll touch on that in a bit later as well. And this is just to give you a scope of what it was like in winter 2014. This is my colleague's digger. They're out doing work, and basically the sea was, the photograph doesn't do it justice, but we were surrounded by the sea there in a major storm surge, which affected our dune systems. So I'm going to go back a little bit closer to in history. Ironically, I've got a picture taken from 1946 as well. And this aerial photograph you can see is of Preston Mears and West Preston, taken by the RAF in 1946. And you can see here, if you look at the grey, the very light grey areas where the red circle is, the dune systems have actually just gone straight inland, whether there's been a major blowout or they just weren't being managed for a while. And if you look at the map next to it, you'll see there's two linear marked down as drains within this field where I put the red circle on the aerial. And that is actually the remains of dune slacks, where the farming that was carried on after the RAF had finished working there. They actually manufactured the land, they cultivated this, that and the other. And obviously these slacks were probably too deep, taking in too much water. They left them, and they're now marked down an OS map as just drains, but they are part of an old dune slack that has been farmed into these linear shapes. And just to give you, there's a little red block here, a little red square on the aerial. The RAF used this, and most of the Solway coastline on both sides, I believe, but we have various target things out at Sandy Hills that are remnants of the RAF flying down the Solway and using flares as target practice. It was a part of a training thing. And this is where one of the lookout towers was placed. Now, and it looks straight across the Solway. Now, if we go to the next slide, I want to give an example of what it looks like now. So if you look at the top picture, you'll see I've circled and put an arrow. This is where the block is. Now, when you go and visit that, the first time I ever visited that when we bought this area of land was, how did they see over the dunes? So from 1946 till present day, if you look at the area I'm showing you now, you can see the ridges of the dune line, and it's really high and you can't see across it. So in a very, very fast, extremely fast period of time, which because most sand dunes you'd expect to take quite a while to mature and roll and actually keep rolling back. But the accretion has been quite fast in this area. Just to give you an example of how dynamic the sand dunes at Mersehead are. So I'm going to go on a little bit about the habitats as well. Eve mentioned various different plants, and I want to talk really about, it's almost a reserve of two halves. So we're looking at the western part of Mersehead, where the erosion is, and there's actually more pioneering sort of spits and sand, and some of the dunes have been washed away. And this is where we get the most sort of species rich sort of flora in here. So Isle of Man cabbage, for example, we have sheepsfoot scabious, and wild pansies, and a whole range of various invertebrates as well, which Eve touched on as well, and various ground nesting birds like little ring plovers and everything. But as we go further west, we start to see there's there's tall species and rank vegetation. Just go next slide. And these are the sort of habitats we want. These are the sort of habitats we've got on the eastern part of the reserve. Here you can see sheepsfoot scabious. In the background, there's some of the Isle of Man cabbage. And again, these areas have been grazed predominantly by rabbits, hares, and maybe a bit of scuffling by man and dogs and stuff like that. But it's bare sand. It provides a fantastic habitat for these species. So I'm going to go on to really how and what do we want to do for the future. So we're looking further to the east of the site, where I mentioned it was more rank grasslands. We acquired the middle, in the bit in the middle. Remember the bit on the purple bit of the purple on the map previously, Preston Mears. The aerial showing the tower block what we inherited was they had fenced off a wide area, which has given us fantastic opportunity, which hasn't been touched for years, but it's allowing the dunes to roll. And in the aerial I showed before, where we're doing all the crop management, you'll see this turquoise hash area. What we're now looking at is to re-fence and allow the dunes to start thinking about rolling over naturally rather than farming right up to the edge. And similarly on West Preston, where you see these two linear ditches, is to break down the fencing and slowly allowing the dunes to naturally roll. It could take years to do this. It's a good thing to have more dynamic systems to introduce it to. Managing some of the farming aspect of the reserve is not sustainable. We are pumping a lot of fertilizers and chemical into soils which cannot produce the goods anymore. So it's about reintroducing and letting the dunes start to roll more naturally. And this gives you an idea, looking from that area I was telling you about, where it's all rank. This is looking down along the beach and onto the coast. And the dunes are probably being stabilized somewhat, really, because we've got a lot of vegetation growing on the tidal, the intertidal, more pioneering species, potentially species we don't want, like Spartania, which is cordgrass, but that's something we need to look at. But the long-term goal is to do something similar, have big open areas, less swards, make it more botanically rich and more richer for invertebrates, such as belted beauty is one we'd love to have here, which is really quite a rare moth. But it's not just about just the birds and the bees and the flowers. It's also we are doing and looking to improve the habitat for natterjack toad. Just to give you a history of this, natterjack toads were introduced to Mersehead in 1999 from Southerness, which is just about 6 miles up the road. It's on that spit, which I showed you on the aerial earlier. And they were then held in an area if you look at the blue dots to the immediate right, if you're looking at the left as you're looking at the picture, they were held in 4 pools within that area for several times and managed very, very wrong, I think, for want of a better word. In 2013-14, we had this massive tidal surge. It washed through. You can see where it's blowing out on the aerial. And the saltwater incursion actually did us a favor because it wiped out all the invertebrates, or the aquatic invertebrates within the freshwater ditch systems behind that, which were a major predator for the natterjack toads. Subsequently, that summer in 2014, we had a turnout of over 300. We identified over 300 singing male toads. And one of the interesting things of this project that we did for 2 years was looking and trying to mark and recapture, so to speak. So natterjack toads have got a fingerprint, and it's called the dorsal warts. And by taking a photograph directly down on top of the toad, you can start to build up a picture and identify them if you recapture them again. And that was quite successful for us over 2 years. The other blue dots in the sort of shows you the slow distribution of how they are moving around the site once we released them from their artificial pools. And we've done that, and we still do work on certain areas of the site. But we want to do more, and there's various reasons we want to do more. One of them is, I'll quickly touch on it, is climate change. And climate change, this map or this aerial sort of shows you a very rough sort of projection of what the eastern end or the western end of Mersehead could look like from 2030 onwards. And you can see the green area down here. This is where all the houses and the farmsteads are. So even way back in the 1700s, they knew how to future-proof. But potentially we could start losing some of these habitats. So we want to push them further to the east. We also want the natterjacks to spread out further in a more natural system. So in 2017, the members of the RSPB and members of the public kindly donated to help us buy this middle chunk of land called Preston Mears. And part of that money helped us to start thinking, what are we going to do there? So the first steps was to go in and actually start stripping out scrub. The site or the part of the dune systems was classified as unfavorable declining under SNH, or natural Scot as they're now known, and part of our work was to help them get that back into more favorable condition. So I think the designation has changed from declining to favorable condition. The first thing we did, we went in. Our predecessors who owned this chunk of land had cunningly hid loads of rubbish in the dunes. So one of the first things we did was try and get to move that. And then we carried on, cracked on, and started removing scrub across a 6 or over 8 hectare area. So I'm pleased to say that's been done. So long term, the next stage is what we want to do is you want to graze those dunes. They have not been grazed in the time I've been there, and I don't think since the time the RSPB have owned the site, which is way back in 1993. This is not from Mersehead. This is a picture I took from, got captured from somewhere else. But the idea is to start thinking about getting animals onto the site to graze, to get into the dune slacks, into the shallow areas, create the right sward for natterjacks to move on. Also, bits of poaching, bare bits of sand be created, and also keep on top of the scrub that we removed. We just knocked back successional scrub by 50 years. So we want to carry on with that. So the next stage we're working on is working with the EU Life project, 100% favourable condition project within Scotland. We submitted a project to think about doing some invisible fencing. The initial project thing, concept I put through was to do fencing with a loop buried into the dunes with these huge collars that would help give the cattle a bit of a shock when they came close to the loop. Thankfully, technology has superseded that idea because it doesn't really work and it's quite expensive. And it's also, I suppose, in terms of public relations, it looks a bit weird, and people are concerned about animals getting an electric shock. But we use electric fencing in normal traditional electric fencing in other circumstances. This is a new system, and it's called No Fence, and it's designed by a Norwegian company. The idea is they have a little collar. You can see on the bottom there, they have little blue collars. They're quite, they don't get bogged down in brash and scrub and everything. And what it does is you use a phone. It's a smartphone. You produce a map, and that's downloaded onto the cattle collars. And then when a cattle gets close to the boundary that we've created through GPS, it'll give off a warning sign. And it'll just warn the animals who are getting close. And eventually one will get an electric shock. But the idea is that eventually they get used to that and they stay within their areas. We're at a stage where we're now negotiating with a new grazier who's really into this sort of concept. And we're really looking forward to how we take that forward. If you're interested in any examples of how this works, I have put a hyperlink up here, and it's a PDF document produced by the RSPB at Geltstale Reserves about how they're managing to do this on their site, and it's working very well, and it's starting to take off with other organizations as well. So that is a really, really brief, rapid sort of what we want to do at Mersehead. I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to hand over to Chris.
Hi folks, my name's Chris Spencer, and I'm a Deputy Manager at the Solway Coast AONB, but also leading on our project on Marlborough Banks and the dunes on the Solway Coast more widely. So our project is, as he said, is part of the Dynamic Dunescapes project. We've been sort of engaged in a nature recovery project in the dunes for the last 3 or 4 years, and Dynamic Dunescapes has allowed us to move forward with that project and widen its scope. So we've been active over the last couple of years, putting in new natterjack pools, and also doing some scrub clearance. Dynamic Dunescapes has allowed us to get on top of some of the Russa rugosa, Japanese rose, invasive species problems we have along the coast, and also to look at grazing of the Marlborough dunes as well. So it's quite a diverse project. It's great being part of the Dynamic Dunescapes project. It allows us to learn from not only the Cumbrian dunes and the work that's going on, and approaches and techniques, but also more widely across the country as well. So there's a lot of sharing of knowledge, which we've been able to integrate into our work on Marlborough dunes. Just to give a bit of context as to where we are. So the Marlborough dunes is roughly halfway between Silloth and Allenby. It's part of a more extensive dune system, and in terms of what we manage, it's sort of from Woolsey dunes down to Allenby, is largely, not entirely, but largely under our management. I've been looking at the Marlborough dunes more specifically. The dunes are sort of split into two. Actually, there's a track running through the middle of the reserve here, and to the south, this lighter area is the area where most of the work we're doing at the moment is on. The area to north here is actually common land, so that both gives opportunities but also limitations in terms of the management approaches we can take on that area. Hugely popular area, very important area. It's triple SI, and is dune heath, and so sort of huge potential for improvement for the habitat for the natterjacks, and also improving the health of the dune heath. But it's also a really important area for local people and for public use, and really valued by both local people and visitors to the area. So just looking at the sort of range of projects and work we've got going on, have done, and looking forward over the next few years. So we started by looking at increasing the number of natterjack pools. The site has probably been underperforming in terms of its potential as natterjack habitat. We had one original pool here. Last year we added a further pool up here, and then this year we've put in 2 further pools, or 3 pools really, because this one is split in 2. We've been re-engineered this original pool as well to increase its success in terms of natterjack breeding. We've got quite a lot of scrub we'll look at a little bit later, and also this purple area along here was fairly extensive Japanese rose growth along this the raised beach along the shoreline, and also we're installing fencing around the site so we can introduce grazing. So an aerial photograph look at the site. So this is the original pool. This was the pool we put in 2019, before we put it in, and then the 2 further pools. You can see this sort of darker areas are heather, that's the dune heath. Quite a lot of scrub, again we'll talk about that. And then this is the area in terms of the raised beach, and the sort of embryo to fairly fixed dunes along this area here. This area here is looking towards the common land, section 51 common land, and so the site is sort of split by this track running through the middle here. Different perspective on the dunes. And this gives you quite a good view of the site. So this is the Marlborough end. This is the track running through the middle down here. Since this photograph, just over the last few months, a cycle path has been installed along the edge here, and the fencing is going to run around this area here. Again, just in terms of perspective, in terms of managing the dunes, there's quite a distinct sort of distinction between this area here, which was actually was a gravel extraction pit sort of before the war, and then was used for some landfill, and those of you local, a lot of wood waste from what was Thames Board and is now the Egersund plant in Workington was tipped in here. So actually the sort of makeup of this area to the south of the reserve, there is quite a lot of humus material in there, and so the nutrient balance is quite distinct, and it doesn't really show up on this photograph, but actually as you walk through the dune you can see quite a distinct change in terms of the amount of brush and the sort of health of the dune heath at the boundary as to where that landfill occurred in the 1950s, 1960s. So to say, one of the first projects we were involved in was putting new pools in. So this was one of the pools we put in 2019, increasing the number of breeding pools, but also increasing or improving the design of those pools to make them successful breeding pools for the natterjacks. We'll see this a little bit later on, but this is a new sort of bund we constructed this year with some of the material removed when we were doing turf scraping, and this was to shelter this pool from the wind. We were finding a lot of the natterjacks were all being forced down to this end and getting sort of beached. The spawn and the toadlets were getting beached at this end, so actually built a little bit of a windbreak at this end. So in terms of the design of the pools, we worked very closely with the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust, and again learning from what has worked in other sites, both in Cumbria and more nationally, in terms of sort of both the design and the construction specification for the pools. Always quite jealous when people like Colin are talking about sort of natural dune slacks. Because of the proximity of a road and also the agricultural drainage, the water table on the banks is quite depressed. So actually just digging a hole doesn't produce a dune slack. The water table is too low. So we have to take a slightly more engineered approach to constructing pools. So we have to use liners. And so this is construction of one of the pools using a butyl liner. And so with Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, what we actually have is a sandwich of liner using a combination of geotextile and butyl liner. So the butyl liner is protected, and then on top of that, we refill the pool with a layer of sand to produce pools of sort of the optimum depth of around about 500 millimeters. So we want pools which are will warm up quickly, and the pools will make use very quickly of that warm water to breed. The warmer the water, the quicker the maturation of the toads, and also that will dry out. So these pools are ephemeral. They will dry out periodically during the summer, and then refill. And we found using this construction and using this design, we're getting multiple spawnings of the toads, and that rapid maturation allows them to sort of occupy that niche of an ephemeral pool, but reduces the competition from common toads, and newts and dragonfly larvae and so on, which would outcompete the toads. So another view of the construction. So we've actually got the liner in and now refilling the pool with sand. So this layer of sand, both, for those of you who are familiar with the site, we did have exposed liners on the original pool, and that obviously caused problems because it got very, very hot in the sun, and we were finding we were losing toads as they were emerging from the pool, just because of the exposed liner getting to fairly extreme temperatures. So the sand infill both protects the liner, and even as we introduce cattle to the site, this layer of 500 mil of sand on top of the liners will protect the liner from any hoof disturbance, but also produces a far more conducive pool for the toads breeding. This is nearing completion of this pool. And you can see around the edge of the pool, we've done a fairly extensive turf scraping around the perimeters of the pools and other areas in the dunes, producing bare sand, increasing the sort of dynamism of the dunes, but also the natterjacks hibernate by burrowing into the dunes, and so actually having bare sand allows them to do that. They're not capable of sort of moving through grass to be able to burrow. They'll also use rabbit holes, abandoned rabbit holes to hibernate in. And this is one of the pools having refilled, and another. Again, you can see the turf scraping around the edge. So that was Natterjack Pools project over a couple of years to increase from 1 to 5 pools. The other project which we've been doing earlier this year was Russa rugosa removal, or Japanese rose removal. Quite an attractive plant for a garden, but quite a thug within an environment like the dunes. So this is an area of Russa rugosa, not actually on Marlborough dunes, but another area we're just clearing at the moment down towards Beckfoot. So you can see it is both quite thuggish and very voracious, and so it expands very rapidly. And this particular stand here is taller than me, and I'm about 6'4". So it was quite a significant issue. The Russa rugosa at Marlborough certainly was less tall, but was both still very extensive along the raised beach area, along the shoreline. So this area is very extensive at Beckfoot, and certainly this was what we were trying to avoid at Marlborough. Left, the Russa rugosa will just sort of take over the entire habitat. So the approach we took, there are a number of approaches for removing Russa rugosa. All of them are both very expensive, and it is, as I say, a real thug. Obviously, it's a rhizome spreading plant, so you actually have to get right down to the roots to remove it. There are some areas at Beckfoot actually where we have actually dug the roots out right down to about 3 or 4 feet, and then remove all the root material. At Marlborough, we use this deep mulching machine. So on the back of a tractor, it actually goes right down to the root system and chops it up. And then using this technique, we will have to come back over the next 2 to 3 years, spot spraying regrowth. But by doing this, we're actually able to, the plant is much weakened, and actually able to identify where the rhizomes are still sprouting, and then treat them over a number of years to achieve total eradication. So there's an area at Marlborough where that deep mulching has taken place. It does produce areas of bare sand, which is a sort of side benefit, really, will allow sort of emergent growth here, and also allow us to spot treat any regrowth. And the final challenge at Marlborough is sort of the succession to rank grass and also brush and gorse, and sort of this shows you some of the issue. In the time that I've been working on Marlborough, I've seen the rabbit population sort of at times expand, but predominantly over the last 9 or so years that I've been on Marlborough quite a bit, the rabbit population has declined fairly significantly, and so we have this rank grass. I think it's around about 20 or 30 years since the area has been grazed to any extent. So we have this very dense vegetative load of rank grass, and really to a large extent it's a bit of a monoculture. And so, to try and remove this density of vegetation, we're looking for some 24/7 volunteers to munch their way through it. And so, introducing a small herd of belted Galloway cattle from an established conservation grazing herd. And so, to do that, the first stage is to fence the site. So that's actually happening now as we speak, but certainly I've been down there today, and the fencing is progressing very well. So a boundary fence all the way around the site, introducing a new entrance here, which will be sort of the management entrance, and where the cattle can be handled, and early in the summer, we will be introducing a herd of initially 8 belted Galloways, and we'll then be monitoring the success of the grazing and establishing what the actual optimum grazing regime will be for the site. That's me done. I'll hand over for questions.
That's great. Thanks, everybody. That was really interesting. So I'll go on to start some of the questions and see if we can get through a few of them. There's quite a few in at the moment. So the first one is, how long is the Dynamic Dunes project running for? And once restoration is achieved, will the dynamic habitats be maintained, or will they be left to succession again? So I think probably Eve, you might have to answer that one.
Yeah, that's one for me. There we are, just getting a bit of feedback there. That's fine. Yeah, perfectly good question. So the project's running until 2023, and unfortunately, as with lots of these kinds of projects, it is obviously short term. But in this case, with Dynamic Dunescapes, because we're working across so many sites, many of those sites are already managed by kind of environmental bodies and organisations. And a big part of this project, as Chris mentioned and Colin mentioned, it's part of like sharing lessons learned, and we're putting together like a large kind of site managers handbook to be able to like carry on, take forwards at the work that are taking place after the Dynamic Dunescape project has ended, and about learning and sharing the best methods of practice. And in those areas that might be kind of council owned or owned by other people who don't necessarily do kind of direct conservation works there, we're working closely with the local communities, and we are looking for like volunteers to kind of get involved and look out for Rosa rugosa, particularly around Haverig area. And we're also teaming up with amphibian and reptile conservation. We're advertising at the moment for volunteers to come and get involved to kind of help monitor the vegetation around dune slats and things like that. So there's lots of ways about that we're trying to kind of continue that project forwards.
Great, thank you.
We've got another question here. around Marlborough Bank, so it's probably one for Chris, but maybe Eve might be able to come into this one. It's a longish question, but it's about a question around what kind of monitoring that you're going to be doing on the site over the seasons, taking in certain species just to assess the impact before the cattle go on. There's a little bit of concern over wax-capped mushrooms there. I think a general question around general vegetation. I don't know who wants to kick off with this one.
Yeah, well, I'll start. Yes, we've got a full survey which will be taking place prior to the cattle going on. We have some historic surveys, but we will be updating those through a full NVC survey of the site to capture the baseline before the cattle come on. We've been very lucky to have some input from one of our volunteers who's carried out a mycological survey of the site, and that certainly informs some of the decisions we've made, particularly in terms of where we're going to place the cattle troughs, and in terms of the concentration of where the cattle will be going, and then like Colin, we also we'll be using the no fence collars, which will allow us to actually manage within the fenced area the grazing regime as well. So sort of from that initial baseline survey and then monitoring, and then also using the citizen science monitoring, which will allow us through a variety of volunteers and also partnerships with things like the Field Studies Council and some of the school and college groups that we have already using the site for their research. We'll be able to have a really comprehensive monitoring of the impact of the interventions we're making.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so there's a few questions around the Rosa rugosa. Now, obviously, invasive species is quite a kind of controversial subject because, especially with something like Rosa rugosa, which is obviously good for birds as it stands. Actually, Colin, perhaps you could maybe answer this one, because I think you've got Rosa rugosa on the Scottish site on the Mersehead as well. How do you kind of balance up the kind of bird interest and the other things that live on it as well with, the fact of taking it out, and then how do you replace it?
Okay, well, obviously, the Japanese rose is an invasive species, and if we don't do something about it, the more natural species are going to be suppressed as a result. In the more mature dune areas, we don't want it there because it's, for a long time it was sort of it was believed that scrub on dunes would help stabilize them. That's not the case. So we will carry on removing the Japanese rose. We actually, through our, I failed to mention it, but in our EU Life funding, we will be taking on a program removing this rose. I saw there's another question there, conflicts with birding and this, that, and the other. So for Mersehead, we have a 4-kilometre trail. We've deliberately left scrub in areas for different types of species, or pioneer scrub, so for birds like grasshopper warblers, for example, up to more mature areas. The areas where we want to do the grazing, really, out in Preston Mears, really sort of, is we would like the dunes to be the most natural they could be for species like natterjack toad, for example. We want to be able to manage the dune slacks. We don't want scrub in those areas because an important species like natterjack toad aren't going to thrive there. But we are trying to find a balance and actually, looking at making sure that scrub in the right areas, natural scrub in the right areas, indigenous scrub will be allowed to grow at various stages, but not across the whole site.
Great, thank you.
That's it from me. But yeah. I mean, for Mersehead, the Japanese rose is maybe not be as dominant as it is with Chris. I'm not too sure. We haven't recently just mapped it all because we have to show what we're going to remove with the EU Life funding, but it's not as intense as I thought it was going to be.
Does anybody want to come in from the Cumbrian side just to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've had the similar sort of debates and conflicts in terms of getting the right balance in terms of scrub control on Marlborough. I was talking about sort of the distinction really between the area which was used as landfill to the south of the site, and then the area which is really undisturbed and has the potential for really high quality dune heave. So in terms of our management approach, we wanted to balance the removal of scrub. I think the removal of, as I would entirely concur with Colin in terms of the Rosa rugosa, that needs to go. But certainly in terms of gorse and scrub, we want to allow it to thrive in the southern part of the site to produce good bird habitat, and where the potential is to really restore the dune heath, we will continue to remove, and then with the cattle grazing to try and suppress the continuing succession to gorse encroachment.
Great, thank you, Chris.
Just adding to the Rosa rugosa question, which there's quite a few questions on this. Arnold Lackey's asked a question around what you think might recolonise the sort of scraped area when you remove the Rosa rugosa, and what the biodiversity benefits are. I think that some of that's been partly answered, but I don't know if anyone's got any ideas about anything that kind of might benefit from those barer patches.
Yeah. Oh, go on.
Sorry.
Go on, Colin. No, go on.
I think all three of us have touched on this, pioneer species and everything like this across the dunes. So poaching from grazing, poaching, removal of scrub and areas are going to leave lovely bare patches, which is going to be invaluable for early floral stuff coming through, and inverts in particular, down to solitary bees, mining bees, all sorts of things like that. So it's about monitoring, going back. It's not just like going back, like Chris was saying about going back and retreating areas, but you're not going to go back and not retreat without monitoring to see the effects of the work we're doing. So there needs to be a legacy. That's what I'm saying, is you need to go back and see what's happening. And yeah, just trying to produce, habitat management. It's always a bit of a battle. That's what I'm going to say. Anyway.
Yeah.
Do you want to add something to that, Eve?
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, you kind of expect like sea holly and things like that to colonise that area, which like particular types of bees actually go to feed off. But as part of the citizen science scheme at Mowbray Banks, I've noticed I say that wrong now with my Barrovian accent. But we will be setting up like fixed quadrats along these particular points where the Rosa rugosa has been removed to monitor the vegetation, and if the Rosa rugosa comes back, maybe so we can understand what impact it's having on those particular areas.
That's great. Thank you for that, Eve. That's great.
So there's I'll combine a couple of questions because we're kind of running out of time. But either Eve or Chris, I think this one's for, is how long do the butyl liners last, and how do you fill the ponds up? Do they fill up naturally with rainwater, or do you have to fill them up? Stand off.
Yeah. The butyl liners, sort of have a 20-year guarantee, but because they're covered, the main threat to a butyl liner is actually UV damage, and because actually we reburied them under a layer of sand, I think we can expect sort of a, I don't know, I'm probably guessing, but sort of pretty much an indefinite lifespan for the liners, because actually they're not subject to deterioration from anything but UV damage. And the pools have refilled, and actually through rainfall, and as I say, they will dry out periodically during the summer and then refill. Certainly, we found in the first time we put the new pools in, we put them in, and really unusually for Cumbria, it then didn't rain, and we sort of have had this issue in terms of sort of the early part of the year being dry for the last couple of years, unusually. So you wouldn't want to fill them with sort of tap water completely, but certainly the advice from Amphibian Reptile Conservation is that actually just topping them up for the first spawning. So if we do have the situation where actually sort of in April, May, we have a dry period and the pools aren't full, then we probably will. Now we actually have water on site for the grazing. We may well top them up to enable that first spawning to get away, and then sort of they may well then dry out later on. We wouldn't intervene at that stage. So as long as we're topping up rather than actually refilling, sort of tap water can actually enable us to get that first spawning away if we do have a dry period early in the year. Again, it's one thing we'll be experimenting with and sort of and monitoring the success of that.
Great, thank you.
We've got 2 or 3 questions around the same topic of access here, so I'll just run them in together. And again, focused on Marlborough Banks, Chris. I'm sorry you're working a bit hard here with the questions. And I think it's just a question: will there still be public access to Marlborough Dunes? I think there's obviously quite a lot of changes at Marlborough recently, so obviously there's a lot more questions. And another question about how hard was it to get the fencing, public consultation, dog walkers, and funding together. So a twofold question really about first about what the access still will be, and then sort of what the process we went through to do some of the fencing and consultation and all of that.
Yeah, it's been a difficult year in terms of public engagement. Even I had all sorts of plans as to what we would have been doing on the run up to the major interventions on Marlborough Banks, and that has been curtailed, as have many other things by the COVID-19 situation. But one of the key things in terms of getting the fencing right was making sure that we were allowing access for where people wanted to go. We wanted to respect people's desire lines across the reserve and access onto and off the reserve. So sort of quite a significant cost element in terms of putting the fence in, but also in terms of sort of the planning for it and the consultation. I spent quite a bit of time throughout sort of certainly over the summer as lockdown was eased, talking to people, but also observing where people went and how they moved around the reserve to make sure that we get gates in that respect where people want to access. So we have a lot of gates in the fence, and we've made sure that all the kissing gates are big enough for people to be able to get buggies through and so on. And although we've removed one boardwalk which had failed and was collapsed, but the boardwalk along the actual the shoreline on the raised beach, that will continue to be accessible for those with mobility problems and wheelchair access. What I did over the summer was talk to people on site. I was on site a great deal, doing quite a bit of preparation work for the work going on, and finding out where people wanted to go, how they use the dunes, and then probably more important in some ways, actually just observing and seeing how people moved across the dunes and made sure we got the gates in the right place. Well, and then to that again, through the COVID-19 situation, really, we've been very active both through social media. We've set up our own special website for the project, so we've tried to keep information flowing on what we're doing, why we're doing it, responding to questions, and sort of hopefully bringing people largely with us. It will be different, and and as I said, I love Marlborough. I have a dog. I walk on there all the time. And it will be different having the cattle on there, but what we've tried to do is minimise that impact and respect how people use the area.
That's great. I'm afraid we've kind of run out of time, so there was quite a few more questions, but we really don't have time to kind of go into them. But perhaps we can try and have a look at them afterwards and answer any that we've not been able to and post them for everybody to see. So it just leaves me to thank the speakers, Eve, Colin and Chris. That was really great and really kind of learned quite a lot there. And I hope everybody enjoyed the talk. I'll just pass over to Naomi for a final few words.
Yeah, just to say we'd really like your feedback. We haven't done our events on a webinar function before until obviously the autumn last year. So we're always keen to get some feedback and some ideas for future sessions as well. You can reply to the email address that you got through your link, those of you who've signed up for this through Eventbrite, but you can also post your comments on the info@Solway Coast A1B page, as well, or use our social media channels. So on both Solway Firth Partnership and the Solway Coast are on Facebook and Twitter. Our next cross-border coastal conversation session will be on the 22nd of April, and it's called How Rocks Shape the Solway Coast. So we're looking forward to hearing a bit more about geology, so a new area for some of these talks. Should be an interesting one. So just thank you very much for joining us, and really good to hear all of your comments and your questions, and such a global audience as well. It's been great. So we hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, and bye.
Thank you.
Have a safe journey from your sofa to wherever you're going for the rest of the evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.